The air in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered not just from the crystal chandeliers but from the sheer concentration of wealth and power. For Preston Davenport, this was his natural habitat. He scanned the room, a king surveying his court, his arm possessively around his new wife, Brittany. But then he saw her. A woman in a midnight blue gown that shimmered like a galaxy, holding the attention of the city's most formidable titans. There was something hauntingly familiar in her posture, in the curve of her neck. He dismissed it. It was impossible. The woman he knew was a ghost of the past, a faded photograph. He had made sure of that. The Metropolitan Future Foundation Gala was the undisputed pinnacle of New York City's philanthropic calendar. It was a brutal arena disguised in silk and diamonds, where fortunes were pledged, alliances were forged, and reputations were cemented or shattered over canapes and champagne. Preston Davenport, CEO of Davenport Industries, a legacy manufacturing giant, felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. At 42, he was the epitome of success: sharp suit by Tom Ford, a Patek Philippe on his wrist, and a statuesque blonde Brittany draped on his arm. "Darling, isn't that Senator Rawlings?" Brittany whispered, her voice a breathy instrument of social calculation. "We simply must say hello. His wife chairs the committee for the Hamptons Classic." In a moment, Preston murmured, his eyes fixed across the room. His gaze was snagged by a woman standing near the sweeping marble staircase. She was the center of a gravity well, pulling in the room's heaviest hitters. Not with loud laughter or dramatic gestures, but with an aura of serene, untouchable confidence. Her dress was a masterpiece of dark blue silk sprinkled with what looked like genuine sapphires, clinging to a figure that was both elegant and strong. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, was swept up in a deceptively simple chignon, revealing a graceful neck and a single staggering diamond earring. He watched as Lawrence Schmidt, the notoriously curmudgeonly head of a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, actually laughed at something she said. Then Reese Corbin, the tech world's most enigmatic and reclusive billionaire, leaned in, his expression one of rapt attention. Corbin rarely appeared at these events, and when he did, he was a fleeting shadow. Tonight he was an anchor, and this woman was his port. "Who is that?" Preston asked, his voice tighter than he intended. Brittany followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted lips tightening into a sneer. "I have no idea. Probably some new money tech founder. The dress is a bit much, don't you think?" Trying too hard. But it wasn't the dress that bothered Preston. It was something else. A phantom limb of a memory, an ache of familiarity he couldn't place. The way she tilted her head when listening, the small, almost imperceptible smile that touched her lips before she spoke. It was like hearing a forgotten melody from a dream. He pushed the feeling down. It was absurd. The women in his world, the women who belonged in this room, were catalogued and known. This woman was an anomaly. His ex-wife Adeline flickered through his mind for a brief, unpleasant moment. He pictured her as he last saw her tear-streaked face in a worn-out cardigan, standing in the beige living room of the suburban house he was leaving behind. Plain, soft, unambitious Adeline. Her world had been small, confined to her little garden, her books, and for a time, him. She could never in a million lifetimes become the creature holding court across the ballroom. The transformation was simply too vast, the chasm between that woman and this one too wide to be crossed. He had left her with a modest settlement, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to launch herself into this stratosphere. "I'm going to get a drink," Preston said, disentangling himself from Brittany. He wasn't going to the bar. He was going on a reconnaissance mission. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding at associates, exchanging empty pleasantries. As he got closer, he could hear snippets of her voice. It was low and clear, with a warm timbre that commanded attention without demanding it. He was only a few feet away now, shielded by a large floral arrangement. He could see her face more clearly. High cheekbones he didn't remember being so defined, eyes a shade of green that seemed deeper and more intelligent than the ones he recalled. She wore her confidence not like a costume, but like a second skin. Reese Corbin said something that made her laugh, a genuine throaty sound that sent another jolt of unwelcome recognition through Preston. He had to know who she was. This was his world, and she was an intruder, an unsolved variable. He stepped out from behind the flowers, ready to interject to introduce himself and solve the puzzle. He caught her eye. For a split second, the polite social mask on her face dropped. In her green eyes, he saw a flicker of something ancient and cold, a history he had written and then tried to erase. And in that instant, the world tilted on its axis. The ghost had a name. It was Adeline. The recognition didn't dawn. It crashed into him. It was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs, making the champagne flute in his hand feel impossibly heavy. The face was Adeline's, but it was as if it had been resculpted by a master artist, chipping away the soft uncertainty and revealing the formidable structure beneath. The shy, hesitant woman he had divorced was gone. In her place stood this creature of poise and power, looking at him not with the pain he remembered, but with an unnerving, placid indifference. It was the look one gives a stranger on a subway platform. His mind, usually so sharp and linear, fractured into a kaleidoscope of memories. He saw her 5 years younger in their old kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, a hopeful smile on her face as she explained some complex concept about solar energy conversion she'd read in a scientific journal. He remembered waving it away. "That's nice, honey," he'd said, his attention already back on the stock market report. "But let's leave the world saving to the professionals, shall we?" He remembered the arguments. They had started as trickles and ended as floods. "Preston, I was thinking of taking a course at MIT online. They have a new program on renewable energy systems." "Adeline, what for?" "We don't need the money. Your job is here, making sure my life runs smoothly so I can do what I do. It's a partnership, but it's not my passion. This is something I think I could be good at. Being my wife isn't enough of a passion for you." He'd been so adept at twisting her ambition into a criticism of him, making her feel guilty for wanting more than the gilded cage he had built for her. The final fight was the ugliest. He had just secured a major hostile takeover, a career-defining moment. He came home buzzing with adrenaline to find her poring over schematics and equations at the dining room table. "For God's sake, Adeline, can't you put this hobby away for one night?" he had boomed. "I just closed the biggest deal of my life and you're doodling about windmills." "It's not a hobby, Preston," she had said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's a new type of photovoltaic cell. The efficiency is theoretically 30% higher than anything on the market." He had laughed, a cruel booming laugh that echoed in the cavernous room. "Theoretically, you, a literature major who hasn't worked a day since we got married, are going to revolutionize the solar industry from our dining room table. Get real. This is why we're not moving forward. I'm out there a shark in a world of sharks, and I come home to a dreamer playing with science projects. I need an asset on my arm, not a liability with a fantasy." The word liability had hung in the air between them, shimmering with poison. That was the night he told her he wanted a divorce. He had already met Brittany, a model-turned-influencer who understood the transactional nature of his world. She was an asset. Now, standing in the opulent ballroom, the memory felt like acid in his throat. The hobby wasn't just a hobby anymore. The woman he had called a liability was standing next to Rhys Corbin, a man who didn't invest in hobbies. He invested in empires. Rhys Corbin put a light hand on the small of Adeline's back, a gesture of casual intimacy that sent a spear of pure, unadulterated jealousy through Preston. He had never touched her with such easy respect. His touch had been one of ownership. Brittany chose that moment to reappear at his side, her presence suddenly grating. "What are you staring at? You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way I have," he said, his voice a low growl. "That's Adeline." Brittany's eyes widened, her perfectly made-up face a mask of disbelief. She scanned Adeline from head to toe, her gaze dripping with a venomous mix of shock and envy. "That's your mousy little ex-wife." "No way. What happened to her? Did she win the lottery?" "I don't think so," Preston said, his mind racing. The settlement had been generous by a normal person's standards, but it was pocket change in this room. It wasn't enough to buy that dress, those diamonds, or 5 minutes of Reese Corbin's time. This was self-made. The terrifying realization began to dawn: the dining room table doodles, the late night studying, the passion he had mocked. It had all been real. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had failed to see her at all. He watched as Adeline excused herself from Corbin and began to walk towards the terrace. It was an instinct, primal and possessive, that made him move. He had to talk to her. He had to understand. He muttered a quick excuse to Brittany and followed his heart, pounding a strange, unfamiliar rhythm in his chest. He was no longer the king in his court. He was a man chasing a ghost, desperate to know how she had learned to fly. For Adeline, the divorce was not a clean break. It was an amputation. Preston had been her entire world for a decade. She had molded herself into the woman she thought he wanted: the supportive wife, the gracious hostess, the silent partner. His final words, "a liability with a fantasy," had been the surgical steel that severed the last vestiges of that identity. She moved out of the sprawling suburban mansion and into a small rented bungalow in a town she didn't know. The first few months were a gray blur of grief and inertia. The silence in the small house was deafening, a constant reminder of the life and the man she had lost. The settlement from Preston felt like blood money, a payment for her wasted years. She refused to touch it, letting it sit in a bank account while she lived off her meager savings from before her marriage. One rainy afternoon, unpacking a box of old college textbooks, she found them, her notebooks. They were filled with the scribbles and calculations Preston had ridiculed. Diagrams of crystalline structures, theories on light absorption, frantic equations about energy storage. Looking at them didn't bring the sting of his mockery. Instead, a tiny forgotten spark flickered to life inside her. This was hers. This was the one part of her life he hadn't been able to touch, to shape, or to diminish. That night she cleared off the cheap particle board desk in the spare bedroom and set up the old laptop she had kept. She didn't sleep. Fueled by coffee and a desperate need to reclaim a piece of herself, she dived back into her research. The literature degree Preston had belittled had taught her one invaluable skill: how to research, how to synthesize vast amounts of information, and how to find the narrative thread in complex data. She started with the MIT OpenCourseWare program he had forbidden her from taking. Every night while the world slept, she was in a virtual lecture hall absorbing information on materials, science, quantum physics, and electrical engineering. She converted the garage into a makeshift lab using the settlement money for the first time. She bought a second-hand spectrometer, soldering irons, and silicon wafers. Her neighbors thought she was a reclusive eccentric. Her breakthrough came not in a flash of genius, but through grueling, monotonous failure. She was trying to develop a more efficient perovskite solar cell, a technology that was promising but notoriously unstable. Her innovation was a unique layering technique using a new polymer substrate she had theorized could protect the delicate perovskite crystals from degradation. She failed 287 times. Each failure was a small, soul-crushing defeat. There were nights she slumped over her workbench, smelling of ozone and despair, convinced Preston had been right. She was just a dreamer, a liability playing with a science project. But every morning the spark would flicker again. It was a defiant what if. What if the 288th time was the one on a cold Tuesday in November, nearly 2 years after the divorce it was? Test number 288. She ran the current through the cell, her heart pounding. The multimeter's reading was stable, and it was high, impossibly high. She checked it again and then a third time. It wasn't just a 30% improvement. Under controlled conditions, her prototype was showing a 42% increase in efficiency, and more importantly, it was stable, showing minimal degradation after 100 hours of continuous stress testing. She knew she had something revolutionary, but an idea without capital is just an idea. The next year was a different kind of hell. She patented her technology under the name Luminera. She put together a business plan and started pitching to venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road. The rejection was brutal and swift. They saw a woman with no business background, no PhD, and no track record. They saw a literature major trying to play in the world of hard science. One VC, a man named Gerald Pike from a top-tier firm, was particularly dismissive. "Sweetheart," he'd said, patting her hand condescendingly after she finished her presentation. "The science is cute, but you're not the person to lead this. Find a nice CEO, a man with some gray in his hair, and maybe we can talk about giving you a small piece of your own company." She walked out of that meeting feeling a cold, hard rage that burned away the last remnants of her grief over Preston. The condescension was the same, just in a different suit. She was done being underestimated. Her last-ditch effort was a cold email. She'd spent a week crafting a 2-paragraph message to Reese Corbin. He was a legend in the tech world, an engineering prodigy who had built his first software company in his Stanford dorm room and was now the head of the sprawling Corbin global conglomerate. He was known for two things: his reclusive nature and his uncanny ability to spot disruptive technologies years before anyone else. She didn't expect a reply. One came 3 hours later. "Your abstract is compelling. The polymer substrate is an elegant solution. My team has been wrestling with perovskite degradation for years. Send me your full data set. Secure server link attached. RC." A week later, a black car was waiting outside her bungalow. It flew her to Reese Corbin's private R&D facility in the Nevada desert. She walked in expecting a team of intimidating executives. Instead, she found Reese Corbin in jeans and a plain black t-shirt, standing alone in a lab that made hers look like a child's chemistry set. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I ran your simulation data," he said, pointing to a massive screen filled with molecular models. "Then my team spent the last 48 hours replicating your prototype. It works. In fact, it works better than your data suggested." He turned to face her, his eyes a startlingly intense gray, boring into hers. "I've read your patent. It's a fortress. I've read your background. It's unexpected. The VCs on Sand Hill are fools." They saw a literature major. "I see a polymath who taught herself quantum mechanics in her garage." They saw a risk. "I see the future of renewable energy." He made her an offer that made her head spin. Not to buy her out, but to partner with her. He would provide the capital, the manufacturing infrastructure, the legal team, and the global distribution network. She would remain CEO of Luminera with full control over research and development. "I don't invest in companies, Adeline," he told her, his voice devoid of the condescension she had grown so used to. "I invest in founders, and you are one of the most formidable founders I've ever met." In the 18 months that followed, Adeline blossomed. Working alongside Reese and his team of world-class engineers, she was no longer a hobbyist. She was a visionary. Her confidence, which had been systematically dismantled by Preston, was rebuilt on a foundation of proven competence and mutual respect. Reese challenged her, debated with her, but always he listened to her. He saw her mind first, and it was a revelation. Her physical transformation was a byproduct of her internal one. The long hours in the lab were replaced by a more balanced schedule. She hired a personal trainer, not for vanity, but for the stamina she needed as a CEO. She bought a new wardrobe not to attract a man, but to dress for the boardroom she now commanded. The woman who emerged was not an invention. She was an excavation, the real Adeline who had been buried for a decade. When the invitation for the Metropolitan Future Foundation Gala arrived, it was Reese who suggested they go. "It's time," he had said simply. "Luminera is moving out of stealth mode. The world should meet its CEO." She had felt a flicker of fear, the ghost of the woman she used to be. The thought of seeing Preston was a cold knot in her stomach. But then she looked at the woman in the mirror. The woman who had failed 287 times and gotten up on the 288th. That woman wasn't afraid of anything. The air on the terrace was cooler, a welcome reprieve from the overheated ballroom. Adeline leaned against the stone balustrade, the city lights of New York sprawling before her like a carpet of fallen stars. She had allowed herself exactly 90 seconds to process the shock of seeing Preston. The sight of him had been like a phantom pain, a dull ache from a limb long since amputated. But the pain faded quickly, replaced by a calm, crystalline clarity. He was just a man. A chapter in a book she had finished reading long ago. "Adeline." His voice was just behind her. She didn't jump. She took a slow, deliberate breath, gathered herself, and turned to face him. He looked older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes and mouth deeper etched by a different kind of pressure than the one she now knew. The arrogant confidence was still there, but it was brittle like a thin layer of ice over deep water. "Preston," she said, her voice even. She did not smile. I almost didn't recognize you," he stammered, his eyes raking over her, a confused mix of awe and disbelief. "You look incredible." "Thank you." The words were polite but held no warmth. She was a fortress and her drawbridge was up. "What are you doing here?" he asked, then immediately rephrased, realizing how it sounded. "I mean, what have you been doing? The dress Reese Corbin? I don't understand." A small, humorless smile touched Adeline's lips. "You wouldn't," she said, the words quiet but sharp. "You never did." The barb hit its mark. A flicker of anger crossed his face. "What's that supposed to mean? I gave you a very comfortable life, a very generous settlement." "You think this is about money?" Adeline asked, a genuine note of surprise in her voice. "Preston, the settlement you gave me paid for the initial equipment in my garage. I haven't touched the rest of it. This," she said, gesturing vaguely at the Gala at the city at herself, "this wasn't bought. It was built." He shook his head, trying to process the information. "Your garage? What are you talking about? That little science project. The little science project you mocked on our dining room table." She confirmed, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but each word was laced with steel. "The doodling about windmills. It's called Luminera Technologies now. And Reese Corbin isn't my date. He's my primary investor and business partner." The name Luminera meant nothing to him, but the context was a body blow. The woman he had called a liability was now the CEO of a company backed by one of the most powerful men in the world. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the Adeline in his memory with the woman standing before him. "So Corbin bankrolled you," he said, snatching at a narrative that made sense to him, one where she was still dependent on a man. "He saw a pretty face, and—" Adeline's laugh cut him off. It wasn't the warm, genuine laugh he'd heard earlier, but a cold, sharp sound. "Oh, Preston, you still don't get it. You see a dress and a pretty face. Reese saw a patent for a photovoltaic cell with 42% efficiency and near zero degradation. You see a woman. He sees an asset. You were right about one thing all those years ago. You do need an asset. You just had no idea how to value one." Just then the terrace doors swished open and Brittany glided out, her expression a mask of forced sweetness. "There you are, darling. I was getting worried." She slid her arm through Preston's, her eyes flicking to Adeline with open hostility. "Well, hello again. Preston told me who you are. It's quite the transformation. You must tell me the name of your surgeon." Adeline looked at Brittany, this woman who was a younger, shinier version of the wife she herself had once tried to be. She felt nothing, not jealousy, not anger, not even pity. "It's called ambition, Brittany," Adeline replied smoothly. "You can't buy it, and no surgeon can give it to you. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned to leave, but Preston grabbed her arm. His touch was no longer possessive. It was desperate. "Adeline, wait. We need to talk." Adeline looked down at his hand on her arm, her expression turning to ice. "Take your hand off me, Preston." He let go as if he'd been burned. "There is nothing for us to talk about," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You made your choice 5 years ago. You chose a life that was predictable and easy. You chose a partner who would reflect your glory instead of creating her own. I, on the other hand, chose the dining room table. It turns out I chose wisely. Enjoy your evening." She turned and walked back into the ballroom without a single backward glance, leaving Preston and Brittany standing in a stunned, crackling silence on the terrace, the cool night air feeling suddenly unbearably cold. Back inside, the ballroom's atmosphere had shifted. The idle chatter had subsided and guests were taking their seats. A podium was now illuminated at the front of the stage. The main event was about to begin, the presentation of the Innovator of the Year Award, a prestigious honor bestowed by the Metropolitan Future Foundation to an individual whose work promised to reshape the world. Adeline rejoined Reese, who gave her a questioning look. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly," she said, a newfound sense of finality settling over her. The ghost had been faced and had dissipated into nothing more than a bad memory. Preston and Brittany returned to their table near the front, but the mood between them was toxic. "I cannot believe she spoke to me like that," Brittany hissed, her voice low. "And what was that about photovoltaic cells? So boring." Preston wasn't listening. He was watching Adeline and Reese take their seats at the head table alongside senators, philanthropists, and titans of industry. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, was beginning to pool in his stomach. He had built his empire, Davenport Industries, on traditional manufacturing. They produced turbines, engines, and generators, powerful, reliable, fossil fuel-guzzling machines. In recent years, profits had been shrinking. The world was changing, moving towards clean energy, and his board was pressuring him to innovate, to acquire a tech company to pivot them into the future. He'd been resisting calling it a bubble, a fad. The lights dimmed further. The chairman of the foundation stepped up to the podium and, after a few brief remarks, introduced the evening's keynote speaker and award presenter. "A man who needs no introduction," the chairman boomed. "A true visionary who has consistently stayed 10 steps ahead of the future. Please welcome Mr. Reese Corbin." A polite yet thunderous applause filled the room. Preston felt his blood run cold. Reese walked to the podium, exuding an easy confidence that Preston had always tried and failed to emulate. "Thank you." Reese began, his voice calm and commanding, filling the cavernous space. "We gather tonight to celebrate the future, but the future is not some distant, abstract concept. It is built piece by individuals with the courage to challenge the present. It is forged in garages and late-night study sessions. It is born from a refusal to accept the status quo." Preston felt a knot tighten in his gut. Every word seemed aimed directly at him. "For decades," Reese continued, "we have been told that there is a necessary trade-off between progress and sustainability, that the power that fuels our world must by necessity poison it. We at Corbin Global have invested billions in trying to solve this equation. And for years we, like everyone else, have hit a wall. The problem has always been efficiency and stability." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Until now." His gaze swept the room and landed with deliberate and unmistakable emphasis on Adeline. "The Metropolitan Future Foundation's Innovator of the Year Award is given to someone whose work represents a paradigm shift. This year we honor a founder who, with no formal background in the field, but with a brilliant, relentless, and truly innovative mind, solved the puzzle that has eluded the world's top scientists for a decade." A screen behind him lit up with a simple, elegant logo, Luminera. Preston stopped breathing. The name he had dismissed an hour ago was now projected 10 feet high, a beacon of his own monumental ignorance. "Luminera Technologies has developed a new class of perovskite solar cell," Reese explained, his voice ringing with genuine excitement. "It is a technology so efficient, so stable, and so cheap to produce that it doesn't just improve on existing solar power. It makes nearly every other form of energy generation obsolete." A murmur rippled through the audience of investors, CEOs, and politicians. This wasn't just an award speech. It was a market-altering announcement. "This technology will power our cities, our vehicles, and our homes. It will bring cheap, clean energy to the developing world. It is, without exaggeration, the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era." Reese smiled. The board was unanimous. "It is my profound honor to present this year's Innovator of the Year Award to the founder and CEO of Luminera Technologies, Ms. Adeline Davenport." He said her married name, the name Preston had given her. It was a deliberate surgical twist of the knife. He wanted everyone in the room, everyone who knew him, to make the connection. A spotlight hit their table. The room erupted in applause, a wave of sound that felt like a physical assault to Preston. He watched frozen in a state of surreal horror as Adeline stood. She looked regal, composed, magnificent. She shook Reese's hand and walked to the podium, moving with a grace he had never seen in her. She accepted the heavy crystal award, her expression one of quiet, steely triumph. "Thank you, Reese," she began, her voice steady and clear. "And thank you to the foundation. There are many people who told me this was impossible, that my ideas were a fantasy, a hobby. I suppose in a way I should thank them too." Her eyes for a brief, chilling moment met Preston's across the silent room. "Their disbelief was the fuel I needed. Luminera is more than a company to me," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the captivated audience. "It is a promise that a better, cleaner future is not just a dream. As of tonight, it is a reality. We are finalizing a multi-billion-dollar partnership with Corbin Global to begin mass production immediately. We project our first utility-scale solar farms will be online within 18 months, producing energy at a cost per watt that will render coal and natural gas plants and the technologies that power them economically unviable." That was the kill shot. Davenport Industries, his family's legacy. Their primary products were turbines and generators for coal and natural gas plants. She hadn't just announced her success. She had, in front of the most influential people in the world, signed his company's death warrant. The applause that followed was deafening. Preston didn't hear it. He was drowning in the silent, screaming realization of what he had done. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had discarded the very person who held the key to his own future, and in doing so had handed his executioner the axe. The rest of the evening passed in a torturous, slow-motion blur for Preston. As soon as Adeline left the stage, she was engulfed. A swarm of photographers descended, their flashes popping like miniature explosions. Senators who had barely given Preston the time of day were now shaking her hand with vigor. Competitors he had crushed on his way up were now looking at him with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. He was a ghost at his own funeral. "Preston, we have to go." Brittany hissed, her grip on his arm painfully tight. Her face, usually a carefully composed mask of glamour, was pinched with panic. She wasn't stupid. She understood the implications of Adeline's announcement. The Davenport name, which had been her golden ticket into this world, was now tainted with the stench of obsolescence. "Go where?" Preston asked, his voice hollow. He couldn't take his eyes off the scene across the room. He watched as Adeline handled the crush of attention with an unnerving calm, Reese Corbin always near her side, a protective, powerful presence. "Anywhere but here," Brittany snapped. "People are staring at us. They're whispering, 'You look like a fool, Preston. How could you let this happen? How could you not know your own ex-wife was—'" She trailed off, unable to even articulate the scale of his failure. He finally looked at her. Truly looked at her, and saw her for what she was, a beautiful hollow vessel, an asset whose value had just plummeted to zero. She wasn't his partner in this crisis. She was just another liability. They made their escape through a side door, avoiding the main exit where the press was undoubtedly waiting. The ride back to their Park Avenue penthouse was silent and suffocating. Brittany was furiously typing on her phone, likely consulting with her publicist or texting her gossiping friends. Preston stared out the window at the city lights, the same lights Adeline's technology was poised to power. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his CFO, Patrick. "Markets closed, but our pre-market futures just fell off a cliff. Down 30% based on the news out of the Gala. The Corbin Luminera announcement is everywhere. Calls are coming in from the board. They're demanding an emergency meeting." What the hell is going on? Preston felt a wave of nausea. 30%. Billions of dollars of value erased in minutes because of a woman he had called a dreamer. He typed back a single word. Handle it. When they arrived at the apartment, the cold minimalist space felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Brittany threw her clutch onto a white marble table. "So what's the plan?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. "How are you going to fix this? My brand is tied to yours, Preston. I can't be associated with a failure." The word failure snapped him out of his stupor. He turned on her, his face a mask of cold fury. "Your brand? You think this is about your Instagram followers?" he snarled. "This is about a 100-year-old company, my family's legacy going down in flames because I was a blind, arrogant fool. And you know what? You were part of the problem. You with your talk of assets and appearances. You were the reflection I wanted. A perfect, polished, empty reflection." Brittany recoiled, her face pale with shock and anger. "How dare you blame me for this? You're the one who divorced her. You're the one who thought she was a nobody." "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What? Get out," he repeated, pointing toward the door. "Pack your things and go. The asset has been devalued. The partnership is dissolved." For the first time, Brittany looked genuinely scared. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. After a moment of stunned silence, she turned on her heel and stormed towards the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Left alone in the cavernous living room, Preston walked to the bar and poured himself a large glass of scotch. He downed it in one go, the burn in his throat doing nothing to quell the fire in his gut. He sank onto a ludicrously expensive designer sofa and buried his face in his hands. The full scope of his miscalculation was crushing. It wasn't just that he had underestimated Adeline. He had actively suppressed her. He had been the barrier to her success. He had mocked the very thing that could have been his salvation. If he had encouraged her, funded her, championed her, Davenport Industries could have been the one partnering with her. They would have been untouchable, the leaders of the new energy revolution. Instead, he was the dinosaur watching the meteor streak across the sky. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. He scrolled through his contacts until he found her name still saved under Adeline. He stared at it for a long moment before typing a message. "Adeline, I am so sorry for everything. I was wrong. We need to talk." He hit send, his heart pounding. He waited. 1 minute, 5, 10. The message remained undelivered, not read. She wasn't even looking at her phone. She was out there somewhere in the glittering city, celebrating her triumph, stepping into a future she had built not just without him, but in spite of him. He was a footnote in her story, the villain in her origin. And for the first time in his life, Preston Davenport, the king of his own small, crumbling world, felt truly and utterly alone. The first light of dawn crept over the edge of Queens, a tentative blush of rose and gold that bled across the violet sky. It touched the spire of the Empire State Building first, then spilled down the steel and glass canyons of Manhattan, setting the city ablaze with the quiet fire of a new day. From the panoramic windows of the penthouse suite at the Mandarin Oriental, the spectacle was breathtaking. The city, so ferocious and loud from the streets, looked serene from this height, a sleeping giant awaiting its cue. Adeline stood before the glass, a mug of black coffee cradled in her hands, its warmth seeping into her palms. She had not slept, not for a single minute. The adrenaline from the gala had been a potent current humming through her veins, too vibrant for the stillness of sleep. But as the night had given way to morning, the frantic energy had subsided, replaced by something deeper and more profound. It was the feeling of a marathon runner in the quiet moments after crossing the finish line, a pleasant ache in the muscles, a profound sense of exhaustion, and beneath it all a vast, unshakable satisfaction. She caught her reflection in the window, a silhouette against the rising sun. The borrowed diamonds and couture gown were gone, replaced by a simple silk robe. Yet she had never felt more powerful. The woman staring back at her was not defined by the clothes she wore or the man she was with. Her form was defined by the relentless will that had carried her through 287 failures, through the condescending sneers of investors, and through the haunting echoes of a past meant to keep her small. Behind her, the low, decisive murmur of Rhys Corbin's voice was the only sound in the suite. He was already on a conference call with his team in Berlin, his back to her as he paced by the desk. He spoke in fluid German, the words precise and commanding. Even without understanding the language, she could hear the purpose in his tone. He was setting the world in motion for her, for Luminera. He concluded the call, switched his phone to his other hand, and began another, this time in English. "Jonathan? Yes, it's me. I need our primary manufacturing hub in Austin retooled for polymer substrate application. Full priority. I don't care what the timeline was yesterday. The timeline is now. Send me the revised projections by noon New York time." He paused, listening, then his eyes found hers in the reflection on the glass. He offered a small, tired smile and a respectful nod. It was a gesture between equals, a silent acknowledgement of the mountain they had just begun to move together. Their partnership, forged in a Nevada laboratory and sealed in a New York ballroom, was not a whirlwind romance. It was a meeting of minds, a powerful alliance built on the bedrock of mutual respect and a shared audacious vision. He had never once made her feel like a project or a protege. From the moment he read her research, he had treated her as a peer, a fellow architect of the future. Her own phone, left on a side table since the previous night, lay dark and silent. She had intentionally ignored it, granting herself a moratorium from the deluge of messages she knew would be waiting. But now, in the calm of the morning, a flicker of curiosity moved her. She picked it up. The screen flared to life, a cascade of notifications flooding the display. Texts from long-lost college friends, congratulatory emails from scientists she had only ever read about, and a dozen alerts from news outlets. And then one notification stood apart from the rest. A single text message from a number she had not seen in years, but which was still seared into her memory. From Preston. Her thumb hovered over the message, a moment of infinitesimal hesitation. This was the final ghost, the last echo from a life that no longer felt like her own. She pressed it. The words appeared stark and pathetic against the bright screen. "Adeline, I am so sorry. For everything. I was wrong. We need to talk." She read the message once, then a second time. 5 years ago, those words would have been a balm and a poison, a validation she craved so desperately it would have broken her all over again. 3 years ago, they would have brought a surge of bitter, triumphant tears. But now they were just words. They were the desperate plea of a stranger, a man she barely recognized. The titan of industry she had married, the man whose approval she had chased, would never have sent a message so weak, so transparently self-serving. He had been reduced, and the sight of his diminishment brought her no pleasure, only a distant clinical sense of closure. He was sorry he was wrong because his wrongness was about to cost him everything. It had nothing to do with her. She thought of the woman in the worn-out cardigan, her spirit meticulously dismantled piece by piece. She felt a wave of compassion for that version of herself, for the pain she had been forced to endure. But that woman was gone, and her tears had long since dried, having served their purpose by watering the roots of this new, unyielding strength. With a quiet, deliberate finality, Adeline held her thumb down on Preston's message. The option appeared, "Block this caller." She pressed it without a second's thought. Then she deleted the message thread, wiping away the last digital remnant of their shared history. It was not an act of anger or revenge. It was an act of sanitation, like wiping a slate clean before beginning a masterwork. Across the city, in the cold, cavernous penthouse on Park Avenue, the same morning sun felt entirely different. It was not a promise of a new beginning, but a harsh, interrogating glare. It streamed through the vast windows, illuminating the sterile white furniture, the obscene voids of empty space, and the fine layer of dust already settling on Brittany's memory. Preston sat motionless on the sofa where he had collapsed hours earlier. The untouched glass of scotch on the table beside him had left a faint ring on the polished wood. His phone, lying face up, was a relentless engine of his demise. It buzzed and lit up every few minutes with the names of the people who held his fate in their hands. Patrick, his CFO, his father calling from retirement in Palm Beach, the lead members of his board. Each call he ignored was another nail in his corporate coffin. He finally pushed himself up his body, stiff and aching, and walked on unsteady legs into his home office. He ignored the blinking light on his desktop terminal, a frantic signal of the stock market's impending judgment. Instead, he pulled open a bottom drawer and lifted out a heavy leather-bound photo album. It was from the first few years of their marriage, before his ambition had curdled into a kind of casual cruelty. He flipped past the glossy photos of them at galas, not unlike last night's, their smiles wide and hollow. He stopped at a candid snapshot he'd taken one summer afternoon in the backyard of their first home. It was Adeline. She was on her knees in the dirt of her vegetable garden, a project he had indulgently called charming. Her face was smudged with soil, her hair was a messy bun, and she was laughing, holding up a lopsided, gloriously imperfect tomato as if it were a precious jewel. She wasn't looking at the camera, but at the tomato, at the simple, tangible thing she had nurtured and grown herself. She looked utterly, incandescently happy. A chasm of regret opened up inside him, so vast and deep it threatened to swallow him whole. He had seen that joy, that passion for creation, and he had not valued it. He had seen her intellect as a hobby, her curiosity as a distraction. He had tried to prune her, to shape her into an accessory that would complement his life, and in doing so, he had almost snuffed out the very light that made her extraordinary. The full, horrifying weight of his mistake crashed down on him. It was a multi-layered catastrophe of his own making. The business miscalculation was apocalyptic. He had actively mocked the technology that could have saved his legacy. The personal failure was even greater. He had possessed a treasure, and in his ignorance had thrown it in the trash. But the real punishment, the true soul-crushing consequence, was just now becoming clear. His desperate late-night text was not for her. It had been for him a selfish, pathetic attempt to seek some kind of absolution to make himself feel better. He saw that now. And its deletion, the silent, unread finality of it, was her true answer. The opposite of love wasn't hate. It was indifference. He had built his life on the bedrock of his own importance, and he was now completely and utterly irrelevant to the one person whose opinion had in the end mattered most. He was the ghost now, haunting the empty rooms of a life he had dismantled while she was out in the sun building a new world. Back at the Mandarin Oriental, Reese had finished his calls. He walked over to where Adeline stood, coming to a stop beside her. "Berlin is ready for us," he said quietly. "They want to schedule the initial integration meeting for next week." Adeline finally turned from the window, her back to the past, her face toward her partner. A genuine smile, bright and full of purpose, lit up her features. "Tell them to book it," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'll be there." She took a final sip of her coffee, looking not just at the skyline, but at the intricate grid of a world she was about to remake. The view from up here wasn't just extraordinary, it was the future, and it was hers. Adeline's story isn't just about revenge, it's a powerful testament to the fire that can be forged in the ashes of betrayal. It's a reminder that our greatest strength is often buried beneath the expectations and limitations others place upon us. Preston didn't just lose a wife, he lost a future he was too blind to see. Adeline, on the other hand, didn't just find success. She rediscovered herself, and in doing so changed the world. Her journey teaches us that true value is never about who you're standing next to, but about the power and potential you hold within. The best success isn't just living well, it's building a world your detractors could never have even imagined. What did you think of Adeline's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment where you proved someone wrong in a big way? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were inspired by this story, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and powerful storytelling. Your support helps us create more content just like this.
A single sentence can shatter a world. For Isabella Rossi, that sentence was uttered over a $400 plate of seared scallops she couldn't afford by a man she thought she loved. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux, and smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Honestly, Izzy," he said, his voice a polished blend of pity and condescension, "this little coding project of yours, it's a cute hobby, but it's time to be realistic. It's never going to be your career." He didn't know that in 6 weeks, that cute hobby would make her the youngest self-made female billionaire in the country. And he definitely didn't know that the first thing she'd do with that power was buy the very company he was desperate to become a partner in. His world was about to be shattered, and she was the one holding the hammer. The restaurant was called Aurelia, a name that dripped with the kind of old-world money that Brendan Cole was born into, and Isabella Rossi had only ever observed from the outside. It was all dark mahogany, hushed conversations, and waiters who moved with the silent, ghostly efficiency of men who were paid to be invisible. This was Brendan's world. He thrived in it, navigated it with an inherited ease that Isabella, for all her ferocious intelligence, could never quite replicate. She felt the familiar prickle of being an imposter. Her dress, a simple but elegant navy sheath, had cost a week's salary. Brendan's suit, a bespoke piece from Savile Row, probably cost more than her car. They were celebrating his latest promotion at Sterling Wakefield, the private equity firm where his father was a senior partner. Brendan was now a vice president, another gilded step on a path that had been paved for him since birth. "To the future," Brendan toasted, clinking his crystal glass against hers. "And to you finally leaving that dead-end job at Innovatech." Isabella stiffened. "It's not a dead-end job, Brendan. It's a stepping stone. And Project Chimera is—" He cut her off with a placating wave of his hand. I know. Project Chimera. Your AI algorithm. It's brilliant, I'm sure, for an academic paper, but a real-world application. The market is brutal, Izzy. It's dominated by giants. Google, Goldman Sachs. They have armies of PhDs working on this stuff. And I have something they don't, Isabella countered, her voice low but firm. My model is different. It's not just predictive, it's adaptive. It learns from market sentiment, not just historical data. It can anticipate black swan events with a 7% higher accuracy rate than anything currently on the market. She had spent 3 years on it. 3 years of sleepless nights fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in her own code. It was her life's work, hidden away on a private server running simulations that were yielding results so spectacular they frightened even her. Brendan sighed, the sound of a patient parent explaining the world to a naive child. Listen to yourself. It sounds wonderful, but who's going to fund it? Who's going to take a chance on a junior analyst from a mid-tier tech firm? I'm just trying to protect you. My father has already spoken to a contact at Sotheby's. They're looking for an art history consultant. With your eye, you'd be perfect. Less stress, great connections, you can travel with me. The blood drained from Isabella's face. Art history. She had a master's degree in computational finance, another in artificial intelligence from Stanford. He was suggesting she abandon it all to become a social accessory, an intellectually stimulating companion for his high-flying life. This was the moment, the final clarifying insult in a long line of them. It wasn't just that he didn't believe in her, he actively disdained her ambition. He saw it as a character flaw, an unsightly blemish on the otherwise perfect canvas of the life he had planned for them. You don't get it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You have never not once tried to understand what I do. Because I understand how the world works, he retorted, his patience finally snapping. The polished veneer cracked, revealing the raw arrogance beneath. It works on power, on connections, on capital, not on some fantasy algorithm you built in your spare time. It's a cute little project, Izzy. A hobby. Now let's be realistic. Focus on us. Focus on a life that's real. That was the sentence, the one that echoed in the cavernous silence that followed. A cute little hobby. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. She didn't see the handsome, charming man she had fallen for. She saw a gatekeeper, a man whose entire identity was built on a foundation of inherited privilege, terrified by the thought that someone, especially a woman he was supposed to possess, could build her own empire from scratch. Slowly, she placed her napkin on the table. She stood up, her movements deliberate and calm. The entire restaurant seemed to fade into a blur. "You're right, Brendan," she said, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. "It's time for me to be realistic." He smiled, relieved. "Good. I knew you'd see it my way." "My realism," she continued, picking up her small clutch from the table, "is that I am sitting across from a man who is so profoundly insecure that he has to belittle my life's work to feel powerful. My realism is that I have wasted 2 years of my life with someone who sees me as an accessory, not a partner. And my realism," she took a deep breath, "is that this is over. We are over." Brendan's face went from smug relief to crimson fury in a heartbeat. "You're throwing this away for a fantasy. You'll come crawling back in a month when you realize you can't pay your rent." A ghost of a smile touched Isabella's lips. It was a cold, sharp thing. "Don't hold your breath." She turned and walked away, leaving him sitting alone with 2 entrees, a £1, 200 a bottle of wine, and a look of pure, unadulterated shock. She didn't look back. As the cool night air of the city hit her face, she didn't feel heartbroken. She felt liberated. She felt angry. And more than anything, she felt a burning, all-consuming drive. He thought her work was a hobby. She was about to show him and the rest of the world just how powerful a hobby could be. The week following the breakup was a descent into a specific kind of hell. The emotional fallout was brutal, but it was the professional sabotage that blindsided her. Brendan, it turned out, was not a man who took rejection gracefully. He was a man who scorched the earth. Isabella arrived at her desk at Innovatech Financial on Monday morning to find her access card deactivated. Her direct manager, a perpetually stressed but generally decent man named David Chen, met her by the elevators with a pained expression. "Isabella, Arthur Finch wants to see you. Now." Arthur Finch was the CEO of Innovatech. He was a relic of a bygone era, a man who wore suspenders unironically and believed innovation was something you bought, not cultivated. Isabella had met him twice in 3 years, both times in passing. His corner office felt like a museum exhibit on 1980s corporate power. Heavy oak desk, leather-bound books that looked untouched, and a panoramic view of the city that seemed wasted on him. "Miss Rossi," Finch began, not bothering with pleasantries, "it has come to my attention that you have been using company resources for an unauthorized personal project." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Finch Project's chimera is a breach of your employment contract," he snapped. "Article 7, Section B, all intellectual property developed using company time or equipment is the sole property of Innovatech Financial. You have been running this chimera on our servers, constituting a significant security risk and a flagrant violation of policy." Isabella was floored. "With all due respect, sir, the core code was developed on my personal hardware. I've only been using the servers to run simulations against anonymized public domain market data. It poses no security risk whatsoever. David knows about my work." Finch waved a dismissive hand. "Mr. Chen is not the one who signs your paychecks. We have also received a tip from a highly respected source in the financial community." A tip. She knew instantly who it was from. Brendan. He must have called Finch over a game of golf at their exclusive country club. He would have framed it as a friendly warning, a concern for Innovatech's security, all while painting Isabella as a reckless, untrustworthy employee. "The tip suggests your algorithm is not only unauthorized but potentially unstable and could expose the firm to legal liabilities." It was a perfectly crafted corporate assassination, vague, impossible to disprove, and coming from a source whose credibility Finch would never question. "That's a lie," Isabella said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. My project is sound. The simulations are flawless. I'm not interested in your simulations, Miss Rosie, Finch said coldly. I'm interested in protecting this company. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You will sign this non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. Our lawyers will be in touch. He slid a thick legal document across the desk. It was a gag order and a professional prison sentence rolled into one. It would prevent her from working in AI-driven finance for 2 years and from ever speaking about Project Chimera. She stared at the paper, then at Finch's impassive face. This was it. Brendan hadn't just broken up with her. He was trying to break her spirit to cripple her career so thoroughly that his prophecy of her failure would come true. He wanted her to come crawling back not to him, but to the life he had prescribed for her. No, she said. Finch raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon. I'm not signing it, Isabella stated, pushing the document back across the desk. You are firing me, based on a malicious and unsubstantiated rumor. You have no claim to my intellectual property, and I will not sign away my right to work. Finch's face hardened. You are making a grave mistake, young lady. We will litigate. We will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. Then I'll see you in court, she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. She stood up. You don't need to have security escort me. I know the way out. The walk back to her desk was the longest of her life. The pitying stares, the whispers. She packed her small box, a photo of her parents, a worn copy of a book on neural networks, a lucky coffee mug. David Chen intercepted her by the door, his face etched with guilt. Isabella, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell him, I showed him your progress reports. He wouldn't listen. It wasn't your fault, David, she said, managing a weak smile. Thank you for believing in me. Your work. It's revolutionary, he whispered, looking around nervously. Don't let them take it from you. That night, in her small, overpriced apartment, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. No job, dwindling savings, the looming threat of a legal battle against a multi-million-dollar corporation. Brendan's words echoed in her ears. You'll come crawling back, she cried, a gut-wrenching, soul-emptying sob that left her feeling hollowed out. She was alone, unemployed, and about to be sued into oblivion. For a few dark hours, she let the despair win. She scrolled through job listings for positions she was wildly overqualified for, just to feel a flicker of hope. Then, around 3 a.m., surrounded by takeout containers and a profound sense of defeat, something shifted. The image of Arthur Finch's smug face, of Brendan's condescending smile, ignited a different kind of fire. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving them all wrong. She wiped her eyes, walked over to her custom-built desktop computer, her one true luxury, and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, showing lines of pristine, elegant code. Project Chimera, her creation. They thought they could take it, bury it, and bury her with it. They had no idea what it was truly capable of. For the next 2 weeks, Isabella didn't just work. She waged a silent, one-woman war. She lived on coffee and protein bars. She disconnected her phone. She ignored the threatening letters from Innovatech's legal team that started piling up by her door. She poured every ounce of her energy, her genius, and her rage into the final evolution of her algorithm. She wasn't just running simulations anymore. She was preparing it for the real world. She refined the sentiment analysis module, feeding it terabytes of live news feeds, social media chatter, and political discourse. She strengthened the adaptive learning protocols, making the system so agile it could pivot its strategy in microseconds. She was building a weapon. One night, while running a final full-scale backtest against the last decade of market data, the results scrolled across her screen. The performance was staggering. If Chimera had been live during the 2008 financial crisis, it wouldn't just have avoided the crash. It would have shorted the market with such precision that an initial investment of $10,000 would have yielded over 50 million. It had predicted the dot-com bubble, the flash crash of 2010, every major market shift, with terrifying accuracy. She stared at the numbers, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a product, it was a paradigm shift. It was the key to a kingdom. But a key was useless without a door to unlock. She had the most powerful financial tool in the world and precisely $0 to implement it. Innovatech's lawsuit was coming. Her time was running out. She needed a miracle. She needed a backer with capital so vast and a risk appetite so huge that they would be willing to bet on a disgraced analyst against the entire financial establishment. She needed a ghost, and she knew of only one. A name whispered in hushed, reverent tones in the darkest corners of the tech world. A man who had vanished from public life a decade ago after his own legendary battle with Wall Street. A reclusive genius named Silas Black. Finding him was impossible. Contacting him was a fantasy. But for Isabella, fantasy was all she had left. Silas Black was more of a myth than a man. In the early 2000s, his company, Cassandra Data, had pioneered the very concept of algorithmic trading, making him a billionaire before he was 30. Then, after a brutal, hostile takeover attempt by a consortium of investment banks, an attempt he famously thwarted by liquidating their key holdings in a single afternoon, nearly crashing the Nasdaq in the process, he had simply vanished. He sold his company, took his fortune, and disappeared from the face of the earth. Rumors placed him on a private island in a fortified bunker in Wyoming, or even dead. Isabella only knew of him because of a single formative event in her academic life. During her master's program at Stanford, she had entered the prestigious Black Box Challenge, a hackathon for quantitative analysts. The anonymous sponsor of the challenge was legend, had it Silas Black himself. The goal was to design an algorithm that could find the signal in the noise of a chaotic dataset. Isabella didn't win, but she placed third. Her prize was a small scholarship and a cryptic email from a heavily encrypted address. It contained only one line. Good work. Most people miss the ghost variable. You didn't. Keep going. She had saved the email, a digital trophy from a faceless mentor. Now it was her only lifeline. With trembling hands, she composed a new message. It was a desperate shot in the dark, an electronic prayer sent into the void. She didn't beg or plead. She laid out the facts with cold, mathematical precision. Subject the ghost variable. Project Chimera. To encrypted address. You told me once to keep going. I did. I built Chimera. It's an adaptive, sentiment-driven predictive model. It anticipates black swan events by quantifying chaotic social and political data. The ghost variables the market ignores. Backtesting shows a 92% success rate in predicting major market shifts. Beta, 0.8 48 hours in advance. I have been fired from Innovatech Financial. They are attempting to steal the IP and are suing me into silence. My ex-boyfriend Brendan Cole of Sterling Wakefield instigated it. I have the most powerful financial algorithm in the world. I have zero capital and about 3 weeks until I'm legally and financially buried. You fought the banks and won. They are trying to do to me what they did to you. I am not asking for a handout. I am offering an opportunity. My algorithm, your capital. Together we can do more than just make money. We can break the system. Attached is the white paper for Chimera and a single time-locked prediction for a minor, obscure commodities future set to mature in 48 hours. Proof of concept. Isabella Rossi. She attached the files, her finger hovering over the send button. It was insane. He probably wouldn't even see it. The address was likely defunct. And if he did see it, why would he care? She took a deep breath and clicked. The email vanished from her outbox, swallowed by the infinite web. For a full day, there was nothing. Silence. Isabella's fleeting hope began to curdle back into despair. She started drafting replies to the want ads for data entry clerks. The next evening, as she was microwaving a cup of noodles, her burner phone, a cheap prepaid device she'd bought for cash, buzzed. An unknown blocked number. She almost ignored it. "Hello," she answered, her voice wary. The voice on the other end was rough, gravelly, as if it hadn't been used for conversation in years. "Miss Rosie." The ghost variable in the Palladium future was the sudden union strike at the South African mine. The news broke an hour ago. The future jumped 18%. Your prediction was off by 0.2%. Isabella's spoon clattered to the floor. It was him. It had to be him. "How?" she stammered. "Your white paper is intriguing," the voice continued, ignoring her question. "Ambitious. Arrogant even. I like it. Innovatech is a third-rate firm run by a fossil. Sterling Wakefield is a den of thieves. Brendan Cole is his father's son, all pedigree, no vision. I have followed your career since the Black Box Challenge. I knew you had potential." Isabella sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly weak. He had been watching her. "You have two problems, Miss Rossi," Silas Black said, his voice a low rumble. "First a legal one, second a capital one. We will solve the legal problem with the capital problem. Be at the offices of Rothman, Geller and Sloan, 45th floor, tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Ask for Mr. Geller. Do not be late. And Miss Rosie." "Yes," she whispered. "Welcome to the war." The line went dead. The next morning, Isabella walked into a law office that made Arthur Finch's look like a suburban dentist's waiting room. A silent receptionist led her to a conference room with a single occupant, a severe-looking man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes. This was Michael Geller, Silas Black's personal attorney, a man known in legal circles as the Shark. "Miss Rossi," Geller said, motioning for her to sit, "Mr. Black has been most emphatic. He has instructed us to resolve your situation with what he calls maximum prejudice." For the next 5 hours, Isabella was swept into a whirlwind. Geller and his team of lawyers dissected Innovatech's case with surgical precision. They laughed at the non-compete Finch had tried to force on her. "This is unenforceable trash," Geller scoffed, tossing the document aside. "Arthur Finch is about to learn a very expensive lesson about baseless litigation." Then came the bigger plan. It was audacious, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. Silas Black wasn't interested in funding a startup. He wasn't interested in a protracted legal battle. He was interested in retribution. "Mr. Black doesn't just want to protect your algorithm. Miss Rossi," Geller explained, a predatory gleam in his eye, "he wants you to have the platform to deploy it. The best way to end a lawsuit from a company is to own the company." Isabella stared at him. "You want to buy Innovatech." "Not buy it in the traditional sense," Geller corrected. "Innovatech is a publicly traded company, albeit a small one. Its stock is undervalued, and its leadership is complacent. Mr. Black has authorized the creation of a shell corporation, Prometheus Capital, with a credit facility of $2 billion. Over the next 2 weeks, we will be quietly acquiring a controlling interest in Innovatech on the open market." It was a hostile takeover. "But why?" Isabella asked, bewildered. "Innovatech is a dinosaur. The technology is outdated." "Precisely," Geller said. "It's a broken vessel, but it has the necessary infrastructure. The licenses, the regulatory compliance, the trading floor. It's cheaper and faster to buy the vessel and replace the engine than to build a new ship from scratch. And the engine is Project Chimera, and you, Miss Rossi, will be the new captain." The plan was set in motion with breathtaking speed. While Isabella worked with Geller's tech team to secure Chimera on unbreachable servers, a team of traders working from anonymous offices in Zurich and Hong Kong began buying Innovatech stock. They bought in small, untraceable blocks, careful not to trigger any alarms. The stock price began to creep up, but so slowly that market watchers attributed it to random volatility. Meanwhile, Arthur Finch, oblivious, was smugly proceeding with his lawsuit, burning through company cash, to harass Isabella with legal notices. Brendan Cole, at Sterling Wakefield, was likely celebrating his victory, confident that he had successfully neutralized his upstart ex-girlfriend. They were all celebrating on the deck of a ship that was unbeknownst to them being bought out from under their feet. 2 weeks later, Gala called Isabella. "We have it," he said, his voice calm but triumphant. "As of 5 minutes ago, Prometheus Capital owns 51% of Innovatech Financial's outstanding shares. According to SEC regulations, we are required to announce our position and can call an emergency meeting of the board to vote on new leadership. The meeting is set for Monday. Monday, the day of reckoning." Isabella felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. Just weeks ago, she was packing her belongings in a cardboard box. Now, she was the majority shareholder of the company that had fired her. "What do I do now?" she asked Gala. "Now," Gala replied, "you go buy a suit, Miss Rosie. The kind of suit that says, 'I own this room.' On Monday, you're not just getting your job back, you're taking his." The Monday of the emergency board meeting dawned grey and overcast, the sky a blanket of steel over the city. It suited Isabella's mood perfectly. She wasn't nervous. She was a live wave, humming with a focused, cold energy she hadn't known she possessed. The suit Gala had advised her to buy wasn't just a suit, it was armor. A custom-tailored, charcoal grey pantsuit by a designer whose name she couldn't pronounce. It was understated, severe, and screamed power. She arrived at the Innovatech Tower at exactly 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the meeting. She wasn't accompanied by Gala's team. They were already upstairs preparing the ground. She walked in alone. The security guard at the front desk, a man who had watched her leave in disgrace weeks earlier, did a double take. "Miss Rosie, you're not on the visitor list." Isabella met his gaze without blinking. "I won't be a visitor for long. Call up to Arthur Finch's office. Tell them Isabella Rossi is here." She enjoyed the flicker of confusion and panic in his eyes as he made the call. She waited perfectly still, a statue of impending doom in the marble lobby. Upstairs, in the 50th floor boardroom, the atmosphere was one of confused irritation. Arthur Finch sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his face florid with indignation. The board members, a collection of aging men in expensive suits, murmured amongst themselves. The only outsider present was Brendan Cole, who Finch had invited as a special consultant to discuss market strategy, a thinly veiled reward for his tip-off. Brendan looked smug, relaxed, the cat that got the cream. "I still don't understand the meaning of this, Michael," Finch grumbled at Michael Geller, who sat calmly at the opposite end of the table with 2 junior lawyers. "An emergency meeting called by a shell company nobody has ever heard of, Prometheus Capital. This is a disruption of our quarterly planning." "All will be made clear, Arthur," Geller said smoothly. "We are just waiting for the new majority shareholder to arrive." A new majority shareholder. A ripple of shock went through the room. Brendan's smug expression faltered slightly. He leaned over to Finch. "Did you know about this?" he whispered. Finch just shook his head, looking bewildered. Just then, Finch's personal assistant burst into the room, her face pale. "Mr. Finch, sir, there's a woman here to see you. She's in the lobby. Isabella Rossi." The name hung in the air like a foul odor. Finch's face contorted in disbelief, then rage. What is that insolent girl doing here? Did she come to beg for her job back? Have security remove her from the building immediately." Brendan Cole laughed a short, ugly bark. "The audacity. Some people just don't know when they're beaten." Geller raised a hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Arthur." "And why the hell not?" Finch sputtered. "Because, Geller said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. You would be removing the single largest owner of this company, the principal of Prometheus Capital, your new boss. The silence in the room was absolute profound. You could have heard a stock certificate drop. The board members stared at Gala as if he'd just started speaking in tongues. Brendan Cole's face had frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the colour draining from his cheeks. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. The boardroom doors swung open. Isabella walked in. She didn't look at Brendan. She didn't look at the stunned board members. Her eyes were locked on one person, Arthur Finch. She walked the length of the table with a steady, unhurried pace, her heels clicking a death knell on the polished hardwood floor. She stopped, not at the side of the table, but at the empty chair right next to Finch's at its head. She placed her leather portfolio on the table. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and steady, amplified by the room's shocked silence. "Arthur, you're in my seat." Finch stared at her, his face a kaleidoscope of confusion, fury, and dawning horror. This is a joke, a prank." Geller cleared his throat. "It is my duty to inform the board," he announced formally, "that as of Friday, 17:00 hours, Prometheus Capital, a firm wholly controlled by Ms. Isabella Rossi, has acquired 51.7% of Innovatech Financial. All necessary filings have been submitted to the SEC. We have the votes. The first order of business for this meeting is a motion to remove Arthur Finch as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board, effective immediately." One of Geller's associates began passing out documents to the stunned board members. The numbers were all there in black and white, irrefutable. Brendan finally found his voice. It was a strangled, disbelieving whisper. "Izzy, how? What is this?" She finally turned her head and looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred, just a vast, chilling indifference. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture, a background object that has ceased to be of any importance. "It's called a hostile takeover, Brendan," she said simply, as if explaining a basic concept. "It's what happens when you underestimate your competition. You of all people should know that." She then turned her attention back to Finch, whose face was now a dangerous shade of purple. "The motion to remove Mr. Finch from his positions. All in favour?" Geller's hand shot up. Prometheus Capital votes aye with its entire 51.7% block. The other board members, seasoned veterans of corporate warfare, knew a lost cause when they saw one. Their loyalty was to their stock options, not to a deposed king. One by one, their hands went up. The vote was unanimous. Finch slammed his hand on the table. "This is an outrage, a travesty I built this company. You ran it into the ground," Isabella countered, her voice cutting through his tirade. "You relied on legacy systems, cronyism, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the future of finance. This company has been stagnant for a decade. That ends today." She looked at Geller. "Second motion. A motion to appoint Ms. Isabella Rossi as the new Chief Executive Officer and Chairwoman of the Board," Geller announced. Prometheus Capital votes aye. It was a formality. In the space of 10 minutes, Isabella Rossi had gone from being a fired, disgraced analyst to the absolute ruler of the company that had cast her out. She stood up and walked to the head of the table as Finch, sputtering with impotent rage, was gently but firmly escorted from the room by Geller's associates. She looked at the faces around the table, shocked, wary, fearful. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice resonating with newfound authority. "The era of complacency at Innovatech is over. We are no longer a follower. We are a predator. We will be implementing a new proprietary trading algorithm that will render every single one of our competitors obsolete. The name of that project is Chimera." She let the name sink in. "Some of you will adapt to this new reality. You will thrive. Those of you who resist change, who cling to the old ways, will be rendered redundant. Your positions will be eliminated." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room until it landed finally on Brendan Cole. He looked physically ill, ashen-faced and trembling. "Oh, and Mr. Cole," she said, her voice laced with ice, "thank you for your consultancy. Your services are no longer required. Security will see you out." She watched as he was led from the room, not with rage, but with a kind of detached pity. He wasn't a villain anymore. He was just irrelevant, a footnote in her story. Isabella Rossi, 28 years old, stood at the head of the table in the boardroom of the company she now owned. She wasn't just the CEO. Thanks to the valuation of Chimera, which Silas Black's accountants had pegged in the low 10 figures, she was on paper the youngest self-made female billionaire in the nation. She looked out the panoramic window at the sprawling city below. It wasn't his world anymore. It was hers, and she was just getting started. The first 24 hours of Isabella's reign were a masterclass in controlled demolition and strategic reconstruction. The news of the hostile takeover and her appointment as CEO sent shockwaves through the financial industry. The headline in the Wall Street Journal read, "Fired an Analyst 28 buys company, becomes tech's newest billionaire." The story was sensational, but it barely scratched the surface of the silent, swift revolution happening inside the Innovatech tower. Her first act as CEO was to call a company-wide all-hands meeting in the main atrium. The employees gathered a sea of anxious and curious faces. They were expecting a bloodbath. They were expecting a vengeful tyrant. Isabella walked onto the small stage, not with a cohort of lawyers, but alone. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked young, almost startlingly so, under the harsh corporate lighting. She tapped the microphone, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Isabella Rossi. As of yesterday, I am your new CEO. I know there are a lot of rumors and a lot of fear, so let's dispense with the mystery. Yes, I used to work here as a junior analyst. And yes, I was fired." A murmur went through the crowd. This was unprecedented honesty. "I was fired," she continued, "because I was building something new, something that the old leadership was too afraid or too blind to understand. That something is Project Chimera, and it is the future of this company, our future." She laid out her vision, not with corporate jargon, but with passion and clarity. She spoke of turning Innovatech from a lumbering dinosaur into a sleek, agile fintech predator. She spoke of innovation, of meritocracy, of rewarding talent over tenure. "For years, your ideas have been stifled by bureaucracy. Your talents have been wasted on outdated systems. That ends now," she declared. "I am not here to punish the past. I am here to build the future. If you are passionate, if you are talented, and if you are willing to work harder than you have ever worked before, you have a place here. If you are here to just collect a paycheck and wait for retirement, I suggest you update your resume." Then came the first of her gambits. "Effective immediately," she announced. "I am dissolving the entire senior management layer directly under the CEO. All departmental vice president positions are hereby vacated." Gasps rippled through the atrium. It was a corporate decapitation. "In their place," she continued, "I will be promoting from within, based on one criterion alone: merit. I've spent the last 3 years watching you work. I know who the real innovators are. I know who the dead weight is." Her eyes scanned the crowd and found a familiar, anxious face. "David Chen, where are you?" David, her former manager, looked terrified as he hesitantly raised his hand. "David," Isabella said, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. "You were the only manager who believed in my work. You protected it as long as you could. You understand what's coming. I'm promoting you to Chief Technology Officer. Your first task is to assemble a team to integrate Chimera into our core systems. You have an unlimited budget. Get it done." David Chen stood frozen for a moment, his face a mask of utter shock before a slow, dawning grin spread across it. A wave of energy of possibility surged through the employees. It wasn't a bloodbath. It was a revolution. Throughout the day, Isabella moved with ruthless efficiency. She walked the floors, not with an entourage, but by herself. She had quiet conversations with coders, with junior traders, with administrative assistants. She remembered their names, their projects. By day's end, a new leadership team was in place, comprised of the company's brightest and most overlooked talents. The old guard, the cronies of Arthur Finch, were gone. Late in the afternoon, her assistant, a sharp young woman she'd promoted from the reception pool, informed her she had a visitor. "A Mr. Brendan Cole is in the lobby. He insists on seeing you. He says it's personal." Isabella felt a flicker of something, not anger, but a weary finality. "Send him up," she said. Brendan entered her new office. Arthur Finch's old office, now stripped of its heavy dark furniture and replaced with minimalist glass and steel. And he looked like a broken man. His bespoke suit was rumpled. His face was pale and drawn. The swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out look. "Izzy," he began, his voice raspy. I had to see you. I can't believe this." Isabella remained seated behind her vast new desk. She didn't offer him a seat. "Brendan, I came to apologize," he said, the words sounding foreign and clumsy in his mouth. "What I said, what I did, it was unforgivable. I was a fool. I was arrogant. And I was jealous." "Yes," Isabella agreed, her tone neutral. "You were." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "My father is... he's furious. Sterling Wakefield is one of Innovatech's biggest clients. He says I've ruined the relationship. I've been suspended. My career is over, Izzy." He was looking for something. Absolution, pity, a lifeline. He was trying to appeal to the woman. He thought he knew the Izzy who would be swayed by his pain, but that woman was gone. "Your career is not my concern, Brendan," she said, her voice as cool and hard as the glass of her desk. "You made a series of choices. You chose to belittle me. You chose to sabotage me. You chose to align yourself with a failing system because it was comfortable and familiar. These are the consequences of your choices." Tears welled in his eyes. "But we loved each other. Doesn't that mean anything?" Isabella leaned forward slightly. "You loved the idea of me, Brendan. You loved the version of me that fit into your world. The moment I tried to build my own world, you tried to burn it down. That isn't love. It's possession." She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "The work I am doing here is going to change the face of finance. I have a company to run. I'm afraid I don't have time for this." She turned and looked out the window at the city stretching out below her. It was a dismissal, more profound and complete than any firing. Defeated Brendan turned and walked out of the office, a ghost from a life she had already left behind. She heard the door click shut. She didn't turn around. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet, clean sense of closure. He was a problem that had been solved. Her phone buzzed. A text from an encrypted number. It was from Silas Black. "Gala tells me the old guard has been purged." "Good. Now the real work begins. Chimera is hungry. It's time to feed it. Don't get distracted by the noise. Your only loyalty is to the future." Isabella smiled. He was right. The past was settled. The future was a blank page, and she held the pen. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The passage of 6 months had not just changed Innovatech Financial. It had forged it into an entirely new element on the periodic table of Wall Street. The old sleepy firm was a distant memory, a fossil preserved in amber. The new Innovatech was a place of breathtaking velocity, a symphony of quiet intensity. The open-plan floors, once a landscape of cubicle farms, were now collaborative pods centered around holographic data streams. The currency here wasn't tenure or titles, it was ideas and execution speed. Isabella had fostered a culture that felt less like a bank and more like a mission control center for the future of capital. A perfect example was playing out on the main screen in her office, a vast expanse of transparent aluminum that dominated one wall. It was 3:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the closing bell. Innovatech was in the midst of a silent, high-stakes duel with Goliath National Bank, the oldest and most arrogant titan of the industry, over a massive block of shares in a biotech firm that had just announced a breakthrough. Goliath's traders, using traditional models, were selling short betting. The announcement was a speculative bubble that would pop. Chimera, however, had seen something else. It had cross-referenced the clinical trial data with an obscure materials science journal, noting that the new drug's delivery mechanism relied on a polymer whose sole patent holder had just been quietly acquired by a tech conglomerate. It wasn't just a drug breakthrough, it was a vertically integrated manufacturing pipeline in the making. Chimera hadn't just seen the signal, it had understood the entire ecosystem around it. "They're still shorting," David Chen said, standing beside Isabella. He looked less like a TO and more like an excited kid with the world's best video game. "They think we're insane." "Let them," Isabella said, her eyes fixed on the cascading numbers. "Insanity is just a vision they can't comprehend yet." At precisely 4:10 p.m., the closing bell rang. A moment later, a news alert flashed across the wire. The tech conglomerate confirmed a multi-billion-dollar partnership with the biotech firm. The stock didn't just rise, it went supernova. Goliath National lost an estimated $900 million in a single afternoon. Innovatech, thanks to Chimera's foresight, had netted over $1 billion. It was just another Tuesday. This kind of success had made Isabella Rossi a legend, but it also made her a target. The industry, terrified of what it couldn't understand, began to fight back. Rivals tried to poach her staff with astronomical offers they all refused. Whispers of illegal insider trading circulated, prompting a discreet SEC inquiry that found nothing because there was nothing to find. Chimera wasn't cheating, it was just playing a different game entirely. The most persistent thorn in her side was a man named Nathan Pierce, a Pulitzer-winning journalist for the New York Ledger. Pierce was old-school cynical and smelled a rat. He didn't believe in magic bullets, and he saw Isabella as a financial warlock who needed to be exposed. His weekly columns were a masterclass in insinuation, painting her as a reckless gambler, a stooge for some hidden benefactor, or a fraud whose luck was about to run out. "The rise of Isabella Rossi and Innovatech isn't a fairy tale," he wrote in his latest piece. "It's a black box, and history teaches us that black boxes on Wall Street are never filled with miracles. They are filled with secrets, and those secrets eventually rot the entire system." Isabella read his column on her tablet as she sat in the back of her car, gliding through the city's neon-drenched streets toward her apartment. She should have been angry, but she mostly felt a strange sense of weariness. Pierce, like Brendan, like Finch, was another man trying to fit her into a narrative he understood. They couldn't accept that the phenomenon was simply a brilliant woman and her even more brilliant creation. The cost of this constant battle was her isolation. Her penthouse apartment was a marvel of minimalist design and smart home technology, a sterile paradise with views that could make an emperor weep. But it was also an empty fortress. Her friends from before her meteoric rise struggled to relate to her new reality. Dating was impossible, a minefield of sycophants and gold diggers. Her life had become her work, and her only true confidant was David Chen. It was during one of their late-night work sessions that the next chapter truly began. David had been running a deep learning protocol, allowing Chimera to search for patterns beyond the financial markets. The results he brought to her were staggering and terrifying. "It's not just supply chains, Isabella," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "It's everything. Based on massive atmospheric data, ocean temperatures, and deforestation rates, Chimera is predicting a catastrophic crop failure in Southeast Asia within 18 months, a famine that will affect 50 million people. It's also identified 5 coastal cities that are structurally unprepared for the sea level rise predicted over the next decade. It's mapping the future of human suffering. They stared at the data, at the cold, hard projections of impending disaster. All the money they had made, all the rivals they had crushed, suddenly felt meaningless. They had created a crystal ball, and it was showing them a vision of hell. "We can't just sit on this," Isabella whispered, the weight of the information pressing down on her. "We can't just use this to short agricultural futures. It's monstrous." This was the moment her ambition crystallized into purpose. The power they held wasn't for accumulating wealth, it was a tool for intervention. "We're going to create a new division," she declared, the idea taking shape with electrifying clarity. "A non-profit arm of the company. We'll fund it with 10% of Innovatech's quarterly profits. We're going to build early warning systems and give them to governments for free. We're going to preemptively invest in drought-resistant crops and fund their distribution. We're going to finance the seawalls those cities need before the floods come. We won't just predict the future, we'll protect it." They called it the Atlas Initiative, a name that signified the immense burden they were choosing to lift. The announcement of the Atlas Initiative was met with confusion by the street and cynicism by critics like Nathan Pierce, who dismissed it as a clever PR stunt to deflect regulatory scrutiny. But for Isabella, it was the only thing that mattered. A week later, a simple, unmarked cardboard box arrived at her office. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single leather-bound first-edition copy of a treatise on modern neural networks, the very book she had packed in her box on that humiliating last day at the old Innovatech. Tucked inside was a note on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the handwriting a strong, angular script. "Isabella, they will always mistake the architect for a gambler. They will always fear the tools they cannot comprehend. I once built a machine to see the future. I used it to win a war, and then I walked away. You have built a machine to save the future. Do not make my mistake. Do not walk away. The world needs its architects." The ghost in the machine is proud. SB. Isabella held the book, the heavy paper of the note cool against her fingers. It was more than an acknowledgement. It was a charge, a warning, and a blessing from the only person on the planet who could truly understand the path she was on. She looked from the book to the flowing data on the screens, then out the window at the city below. The journey had been forged in the fires of betrayal and humiliation. She had been dismissed, underestimated, and cast out. Brendan Cole was a faded memory, a cautionary tale. Arthur Finch and Nathan Pierce were just voices from an old world, their skepticism the dying echo of an obsolete era. Her story had never truly been about revenge. Revenge was a closed loop, a snake eating its own tail. Her story was one of creation, of building something where nothing existed before. She hadn't just bought a company, she had given it a soul. She had built an empire, not of money, but of purpose. And as she stood there, the architect of tomorrow holding a message from the ghost of yesterday, she knew with absolute certainty that her life's work, the cute little hobby that had sparked a revolution, was ready for its grandest, most important task. What an incredible journey of resilience, intelligence, and ultimate triumph. Isabella Rossi's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Her refusal to be broken, her unwavering belief in her own vision, and her transformation of personal pain into world-changing power is an inspiration to anyone who has ever been underestimated or told their dream was just a hobby. What did you think of Isabella's epic comeback? Was her takeover ruthless or justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found this story as motivating as I did, please give this video a huge thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear that their ambition is valid and their dreams are worth fighting for. And of course, if you want more stories of incredible underdogs who change the game, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for listening.